The loneliness was a physical thing, a cold spot in the center of my chest that no amount of tea or layered blankets could warm. It had been my constant companion for 2 years, ever since I'd moved to the city, convinced that a change of scenery would somehow jolt my life out of its grayscale routine. Instead, I just traded a familiar loneliness for a new, more expensive one. My apartment, a third-floor walk-up with decent light and questionable plumbing, was my sanctuary and my cell. I worked from home as a graphic designer, which meant my primary social interactions were with the bodega cat downstairs and the disembodied voices on my conference calls. It was a life lived at a remove, observing the vibrant pulse of the city from behind a pane of glass. A new draft had joined the cold spot in my chest as my other unwelcome companion. It snaked in from the large, beautiful, and utterly useless window in the living room, a relic from the 1920s that looked grand but functioned abysmally. For weeks, I tried to ignore it. I stuffed a towel along the sill. I bought a thick, ugly curtain. But the November chill was persistent, a quiet, constant reminder of the building's and my own inherent flaws. Finally, defeated, I dug out the lease agreement. At the bottom, under landlord, was a name and a number. Sam Kowalski. I'd met him only once, a brief, transactional handshake in a cramped rental office where he'd handed me the keys and grunted something about keeping the noise down. He seemed solid, broad-shouldered and quiet, with hands that looked like they knew their way around a toolbox. The thought of calling him filled me with a familiar social dread. But the draft was winning. It made the pages of my books flutter and sent shivers down my spine, even when I was bundled in a hoodie. With a sigh that felt like it carried the weight of my entire solitary existence, I dialed the number. It rang 3 times, and I was just about to hang up, already rehearsing my surrender to the cold, when a voice answered. A low, calm rumble. Sam. Hi. Sam. I began, my own voice sounding thin and reedy in comparison. This is Leo from apartment 3B. Leo Gallo. A pause. I could hear the faint sound of sanding in the background, a rhythmic, abrasive whisper. Right. The artist. I blinked. He remembered me? Graphic designer, actually. Anyway, I'm sorry to bother you, but there's a pretty serious draft coming from the living room window. I think the seal might be gone. Okay, he said. The sanding stopped. I can come by tomorrow. Morning good. Yeah, morning is perfect. Anytime. 10 o'clock, he said, and the line went dead. No goodbye, no pleasantries. Just a time. It was efficient, impersonal, and exactly what I should have expected. And yet, the fact that he'd remembered me, even a misremembered version of me, sent a tiny, stupid flicker of warmth through my chest. The artist. It sounded so much more romantic than the guy who stares at a screen for 10 hours a day. The next morning, I was a mess of low-grade anxiety. I cleaned the apartment as if preparing for a royal visit, suddenly hyper-aware of the dust on the bookshelves and the stack of takeout containers by the recycling bin. I even changed my shirt twice, settling on a plain gray Henley that felt suitably neutral. Why was I so nervous? He was just the landlord, a guy coming to do a job. But the memory of his voice, that low and steady sound, had lodged itself in my brain. At precisely 10 o'clock, a firm knock echoed through the apartment. I took a deep breath and opened the door. And there he was, Sam Kowalski. He was taller than I remembered, filling the doorframe in a way that made my small hallway feel even smaller. He wore a faded Carhartt jacket, jeans dusted with sawdust, and sturdy work boots. A light stubble shadowed his jaw, and his dark hair was cut short and neat. He smelled of cold morning air, sawdust, and something else, something clean and faintly spicy, like cedar. He wasn't smiling, but his eyes, a deep and surprisingly gentle brown, met mine directly. Leo, he said. It wasn't a question. Sam. Hi. Come on in. I stepped back, suddenly feeling clumsy and insubstantial in his presence. He moved past me, his arm brushing against mine, and a jolt, sharp and unexpected, shot through me. It was nothing, a simple accident of proximity, but my skin tingled where he'd touched it. He set a heavy-looking toolbox on the floor with a solid thud. Show me the window. I led him into the living room, feeling his presence behind me like a source of heat. The room, which usually felt spacious to me, now seemed crowded with just the two of us in it. He walked straight to the window, his movements economical and sure. He ran a large, calloused hand along the frame, his brow furrowed in concentration. I found myself watching his hands, the way his fingers expertly probed the seams, the quiet competence in every gesture. They were hands that built things, fixed things. Strong hands. "Yeah, you're right," he said, his voice pulling me from my reverie. "The glazing putty is cracked all to hell. It's crumbling." He pressed a thumb against a section and a small chunk of dried putty fell away, leaving a dark gap. "Whole thing needs to be stripped and redone." "Is that a big job?" I asked, my mind already calculating the hours of awkwardness I'd have to endure. He glanced over his shoulder at me. A faint smile touched the corner of his mouth, a tiny upward quirk that transformed his stoic face. "Not for me, but it'll take a few hours. I'll need to scrape out the old stuff, put in the new, let it set." "Oh, okay." He turned back to the window, already pulling tools from his box. "You can go about your day. I'll be quiet." But I couldn't. My own work, a branding project for a new line of organic dog food, suddenly seemed trivial and absurd. How could I focus on font pairings when there was this force of quiet masculinity disassembling my window frame? I retreated to the kitchen, which was connected to the living room by a wide archway, and pretended to make myself busy. I put the kettle on, my movements stiff and self-conscious. I was acutely aware of him, of the scrape of his putty knife, the soft grunt of effort as he worked a stubborn piece free, the faint, clean scent of him that had somehow permeated the air. I watched him from the corner of my eye. He worked with a focused intensity that was mesmerizing. There was no wasted motion, no hesitation, just a steady, patient rhythm. His jacket came off, revealing a dark thermal shirt that stretched across his broad back and shoulders. The muscles in his forearms bunched and relaxed as he worked. I felt a flush creep up my neck, a hot mix of fascination and embarrassment. I was staring. I was being a creep. My heart is hammering against my ribs. Just act normal. He's a man fixing a window. That's all. But it wasn't all. It was the way he'd looked at me when he arrived. The way he'd said my name. The way his presence seemed to change the very atmosphere of my apartment, charging it with a low-level current of energy I hadn't realized was missing. The kettle shrieked, startling me. I fumbled with it, pouring hot water into a mug. My hands were shaking slightly. "You want one?" The words were out of my mouth before I could stop them. Sam paused his scraping and looked over at me. He seemed to consider the offer for a moment, his brown eyes unreadable. I braced myself for a polite refusal. "Sure," he said. "Thanks. Black, 2 sugars if you have it." My heart did a stupid little flip. It was such a small thing, but it felt like a connection, a tiny bridge built between his world of sawdust and tools and my world of herbal tea and anxious thoughts. I made his mug, my hands suddenly steady, and carried it over to him. "Careful, it's hot," I said, my voice barely a whisper. He took the mug from me, his fingers brushing against mine. His skin was warm and rough, and the contact, fleeting as it was, sent another one of those electric jolts through my system. He didn't pull away immediately. His gaze held mine for a second too long, and in that second, I saw something. A flicker of something. It wasn't just politeness. It was a kind of focused attention, the same he'd given the window frame, but now it was on me. Then he blinked, and it was gone. "Appreciate it," he murmured, turning back to his work. I retreated to the kitchen, my mind racing. I was imagining things. I had to be. I was a lonely gay man with a crush on the handsome, presumably straight handyman. It was a cliché. I was a cliché. I leaned against the counter, sipping my own tea, trying to get my breathing under control. But I couldn't stop replaying the moment. The brush of his fingers. The look in his eyes. He worked for another hour in near silence, punctuated only by the sounds of his tools and the occasional sip from his mug. I sat at my small kitchen table, pretending to answer emails on my laptop, but my focus was entirely on him. I studied the line of his jaw, the way a few strands of dark hair fell onto his forehead, the solid, grounded way he stood. He was like an anchor in the shifting sea of my life. When he finished scraping out all the old putty, he cleaned up the mess with a small dustpan and brush, his movements neat and contained. He packed the debris into a small bag. Then he turned to me. "All right, that's the prep done," he said. "I'm going to lay the new glazing now. It'll need about a day to cure properly before I can think about paint. So, no opening the window. Wouldn't dream of it." I said, trying for a light tone. He nodded. Then his eyes scanned the room, lingering on my bookshelf, which was overflowing with art history books and graphic novels. You really are an artist, huh? I told you, graphic designer. I corrected gently, a smile playing on my lips. Same difference, he said, his own faint smile returning. You draw this stuff? He gestured vaguely towards the wall where I had a few of my own prints framed, abstract, geometric landscapes. Some of it. Just a hobby. It's good, he said simply. He wasn't fawning over it. It was a statement of fact, delivered in his low, steady voice. And somehow, that made it mean more than any effusive compliment ever could. You have a good eye for color. He then pulled out a tube of glazing compound and a new knife. He worked the compound with his hands, warming it, making it pliable. I watched, fascinated, as he began to apply it to the frame, pressing it into the channel with a smooth, practiced motion. It was like watching a sculptor. There was an artistry to it, a quiet grace that I hadn't expected. The silence stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was companionable. The apartment was filled with the soft, rhythmic sound of his work and the faint, earthy smell of the glazing compound. The cold draft was gone, sealed away. In its place, there was just this quiet warmth, this shared space. When he was finally finished, the sun was beginning to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the floor. He cleaned his tools meticulously, wiping each one down before placing it back in its designated spot in the toolbox. The ritual was as mesmerizing as the work itself. All done for today, he announced, snapping the toolbox shut. I'll be back in a day or two to check on it, see if it's ready for paint. Okay, great. Thank you, I said, following him to the door. The apartment already felt emptier, the silence he left behind louder than the noise he had made. At the door, he paused and turned to face me. He was close again, close enough that I could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. How's your day been? He asked. The question caught me completely off guard. It was so simple, so normal, but coming from him, it felt monumental. It wasn't about the window, or the rent, or the building. It was about me. It's been fine. Quiet. I stammered, feeling my face grow warm again. He nodded slowly, his gaze searching my face. Quiet is good sometimes, he hesitated, as if he wanted to say more. His hand lifted slightly, then dropped back to his side. I'll see you in a couple of days, Leo. And then he was gone. I stood at the closed door for a long time, my hand resting on the spot his shoulder had brushed hours earlier. The air was still thick with the scent of cedar and sawdust. The draft was gone, but the cold spot in my chest had been replaced by a different feeling entirely, a nervous, fluttering, terrifying hope. He had fixed the draft, but I had a sinking feeling he had broken something open inside of me. The next 2 days were a special kind of torture. I replayed every second of his visit in a continuous loop in my head. The way he'd said my name, the brush of our fingers, the unexpected question about my day. I analyzed each moment from every conceivable angle, searching for meaning, for confirmation. Was he just a genuinely nice, thorough landlord? Or was there something else there? That flicker I thought I'd seen in his eyes? My brain, a seasoned professional in the art of self-sabotage, presented compelling arguments for both sides. He's just being friendly. You're reading into it because you're lonely. No, that look was real. People don't look at their tenants like that. The internal debate was exhausting. I tried to work, but my designs looked flat and lifeless. The vibrant colors I usually loved felt dull. Everything seemed muted in comparison to the vivid sensory memory of Sam's presence in my apartment. I found myself walking over to the window, running my finger along the smooth, new seal of putty. It was perfect, solid, dependable, just like the man who'd put it there. On the third day, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Sam, window ready for paint. Can I stop by this afternoon? My heart leaped into my throat. I typed and deleted 3 different responses before settling on a simple, pathetically eager. Yes, afternoon is great. The 3 dots that indicated he was typing felt like a drum roll. Around 3. Perfect. I spent the next few hours in another frenzy of anxiety-fueled cleaning. It was ridiculous. He was coming to paint a window frame, not to perform a white glove inspection. But I couldn't help it. I wanted my space, my life, to look as put together and competent as he was. It was a fool's errand. He arrived at 3 on the dot, just as before. This time, he wasn't wearing his heavy work jacket. Just a gray, long-sleeved t-shirt that fit him in a way that made it difficult for me to form coherent sentences. He carried a much smaller tool bag and a can of white paint. The scent of cedar and sawdust was fainter today, replaced by the clean, sharp smell of paint thinner. "Hey," he said, his smile a little easier this time. "Hi, come in." He went straight to the window, giving me a wide berth as he passed. My overthinking mind immediately cataloged it. He's avoiding touching me. He regrets the other day. It was all in my head. I felt a familiar wave of disappointment wash over me. He inspected the putty, running his thumb over it. "Cured up nice," he said, more to himself than to me. He laid down a drop cloth with practiced efficiency and opened the can of paint. The chemical smell filled the room. I hovered awkwardly in the kitchen again, feeling like a spare part. I should just go into my bedroom and work. Give him his space. But I was rooted to the spot, a moth drawn to a quiet, steady flame. He worked silently, applying the paint with a small, precise brush. His concentration was absolute. I watched the steady movement of his hand, the way his knuckles were scarred and calloused, the quiet strength in them. After a few minutes of this silent observation, my own inaction felt unbearable. Do you enjoy this kind of work?" I asked, my voice sounding loud in the quiet room. He didn't look up from his painting, but he answered, "Yeah, I do." "You're good at it," I added. "Very meticulous." He paused, dipping his brush in the can. He finally looked over at me, a thoughtful expression on his face. "I like making things right, taking something broken and making it whole again. It's satisfying." His gaze was direct, and his words seemed to hang in the air between us, suddenly imbued with a much deeper meaning. Taking something broken and making it whole. Was he talking about a window, or was he talking about something else entirely? About me? "Stop it, Leo. He's talking about wood and putty." He turned back to his painting, and I was left to grapple with the ambiguity. I decided to press my luck, emboldened by his willingness to talk. "So, you own this building?" I asked. "My dad did," he said, his voice a little softer. "He passed away a few years ago, left it to me." "Oh, I'm sorry. It's all right. He was a good man. Taught me everything I know about this stuff." He gestured with the paintbrush. "He was a carpenter. A real one. I just tinker. You seem like more than a tinkerer to me." That earned me another one of his small, rare smiles. "Thanks." He finished a section of the frame and straightened up, stretching his back. He always said, if a job's worth doing, it's worth doing right. Didn't have a lot of patience for half measures. There was a story there, a history contained in that simple statement. I found myself wanting to know all of it. I wanted to know about his father, about what he was like before he was my landlord, what he did on the days he wasn't fixing my apartment. "It's a lot of work, managing a whole building by yourself," I said. "Keeps me busy," he said, his tone shifting slightly, becoming more guarded. I had pushed too far. I retreated back into the safe territory of silence, watching him apply the second coat of paint. He finished quickly, the new paint gleaming, pristine and white. The window looked brand new. It was perfect. He started cleaning up, his movements efficient as always. I felt a familiar pang of disappointment that he was about to leave. I didn't want him to. I wanted him to stay, to keep talking, to fill the quiet spaces of my apartment and my life. As he was packing his brushes, his phone, which was sitting on the windowsill, buzzed. He glanced at it, and his expression tightened almost imperceptibly. He swiped to dismiss the notification and quickly put the phone in his pocket. It was a tiny reaction, probably meaningless, but my hyper-observant brain filed it away. "Looks good," I said, gesturing to the window. "Thank you, Sam. Really. No problem," he said, his eyes not quite meeting mine. He seemed distracted now, his earlier openness gone, replaced by that initial stoic reserve. He snapped his bag shut and headed for the door. "This is it. He's leaving. Say something. Anything." I can pay you for the materials," I blurted out, following him. He stopped at the door and turned. "Don't worry about it. It's my job." He looked at me then, and the guarded expression softened. He seemed to be wrestling with something. "Leo," he started, then stopped. He shook his head slightly. "I'll let this dry. Should be good to go by tomorrow." And he was gone, leaving me alone with a perfectly painted window and a swirling vortex of confusion and longing. The brief connection we'd had felt like it had been severed. The guardedness, the dismissed phone call, it all pointed to a life outside of these walls that I wasn't, and would never be, a part of. He was just the landlord, and I was just the tenant, the artist in 3B. I went to bed that night feeling foolish. The hope that had bloomed in my chest had withered. I had built a whole romantic narrative out of a few polite gestures and a shared cup of tea. It was pathetic. I resolved to put him out of my mind, to go back to my quiet, grayscale life. It was safer there. There were no drafts, and no chance of getting hurt. A week passed. I heard nothing from Sam. The window was perfect. The apartment was warm. But the silence felt heavier than ever. Every creak of the floorboards in the hallway made my head snap up. Every time I went to get the mail, I felt a ridiculous flutter of anticipation, hoping to run into him. I never did. Then, on a Tuesday night, the questionable plumbing finally made its move. I was washing dishes when I heard a sickening gurgle from under the sink, followed by the smell of stagnant, unpleasant water. I opened the cabinet to find a steady drip 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 coming from the U-bend pipe, pooling on the warped particle board below. I swore under my breath. Of all the things to break, I placed a pot under the leak, my heart sinking. I had to call him. There was no way around it. My brief, fragile fantasy had crashed and burned, and now I had to face him again in the cold, awkward light of reality. I texted him, my message clinical and to the point. Hi Sam. Sink is leaking in 3B. Looks like the pipe under the basin. The reply came almost instantly. On my way. My stomach twisted into a knot. On my way. Not, I'll be there tomorrow, not can it wait. Just on my way. It was almost 9 o'clock at night. 20 minutes later, his knock came. I opened the door to find him looking tired. He was still in his work clothes, but they were smudged with grease now, and there was a weariness around his eyes that hadn't been there before. Sorry to call you so late, I said, stepping aside. Better late than a flooded kitchen, he said, his voice flat. He walked past me and crouched down to look under the sink, the big toolbox appearing at his side as if by magic. The space was cramped, and he had to contort his large frame to get a good look. Yeah, the seal's shot, he muttered, his voice muffled by the cabinet. I've got a replacement. He started working, the clank of his wrench echoing in the small kitchen. I stood uselessly nearby, wringing my hands. The air was thick with tension. This was nothing like his last visits. There was no easy silence, no shared tea, no conversation about art. This was purely transactional. He was a man with a job to do, and I was the source of the job. Can I get you anything? I asked, just to break the silence. Got a flashlight, he grunted, his arm disappearing deeper into the cabinet. The light in here is terrible. Yeah, of course. I scrambled to find the flashlight I kept in a junk drawer. I flicked it on and handed it to him. Our fingers brushed, and this time, the jolt was almost painful in its intensity. He pulled his hand back quickly, as if he'd been burned. My heart sank. He definitely felt it too, and he didn't like it. He took the flashlight without a word. I stayed there, crouched beside the cabinet, holding my breath. I could have moved away, given him space, but I was frozen, trapped in this weird, intimate tableau. We were inches apart, separated only by a thin cabinet wall. I could smell the faint scent of grease and metal on him, mixed with that same underlying cedar spice. I could hear his quiet, rhythmic breathing. He worked for several minutes. The only sounds the scrape of metal on metal and his low grunts of effort. The silence stretched, becoming more and more loaded. I had to say something. I couldn't stand it. Rough day? I asked softly. He stopped working. The wrench fell from his hand with a loud clatter. He didn't move for a long moment. Then, he slowly backed out from under the sink, unfolding his long limbs until he was sitting on the kitchen floor, his back against the cabinets. He looked utterly exhausted. He ran a hand over his face, scrubbing at his tired eyes. You could say that, he said, his voice raw. He looked at me, and the mask was gone. The stoicism, the reserve, it had all crumbled away, leaving behind a raw vulnerability that took my breath away. Do you ever feel like you're just patching holes? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Like you run from one leak to the next, putting on a patch, knowing damn well another one's going to spring up somewhere else. I am no longer in my kitchen. I am somewhere else entirely, a place of raw, unguarded honesty. My heart aches for him. All the time, I whispered back. He held my gaze, and the space between us vibrated with everything that hadn't been said. The window, the tea, the talk of art, the avoided touches, the late-night plumbing disaster. It all coalesced into this single, charged moment on my kitchen floor. "This isn't just about the plumbing, is it, Leo?" he asked, his voice low and rough. My breath hitched. The world seemed to slow down, narrowing to the space between us, the scent of paint and cedar and his skin, the weary, searching look in his deep brown eyes. "No," I managed to say, my voice trembling. "It's not." He closed his eyes for a second, a flicker of something, pain, relief, I couldn't tell, crossing his face. Then he opened them, and his gaze was clear and resolute. He reached out, his hand moving slowly, deliberately, as if giving me every possible chance to pull away. He didn't touch my face or my shoulder. He gently took the useless flashlight from my nerveless fingers, setting it aside on the floor. Then his hand came back and his rough, warm fingers closed around mine. His touch was an anchor. It was solid and real, and it stopped the frantic spinning in my head. He just held my hand, his thumb stroking slowly over my knuckles. We sat there, on the cold linoleum floor of my kitchen, surrounded by tools and the smell of leaking pipes, and it was the most intimate moment of my life. He leaned forward, ever so slightly. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, wild bird. I could see the exhaustion etched in the lines around his eyes, but I could also see a question there, a deep and profound vulnerability that mirrored my own. I leaned in too, closing the small distance between us. His lips were chapped and tasted faintly of coffee. The kiss wasn't hungry or demanding. It was slow and careful and deeply, achingly honest. It was a question and an answer, a confession and an absolution all at once. The scratch of his stubble against my skin was a grounding, real sensation in a moment that felt completely surreal. His other hand came up, not to pull me closer, but to rest gently on the side of my neck, his thumb stroking the sensitive skin just below my ear. It was over as slowly as it began. He pulled back, just enough to look at me. His forehead rested against mine, and I could feel his breath on my lips. His eyes were dark, searching mine for something. Reassurance. Confirmation. "Leo," he breathed, and my name was a prayer on his lips. I couldn't speak. I just tightened my grip on his hand, trying to pour all the years of loneliness, all the weeks of silent pining, all the terrifying, fluttering hope into that single point of contact. He seemed to understand. A long, shuddering breath escaped him, and he closed his eyes. "Okay," he whispered. Just that one word. But it held a universe of meaning. It meant I see you. It meant this is real. It meant okay. He pulled away then, and the loss of his warmth was immediate and sharp. He stood up, his movement stiff. He looked down at the mess of tools on the floor as if seeing them for the first time. The spell was broken. Awkwardness, sharp and cold, rushed into the space the intimacy had occupied. I should finish this," he said, his voice strained. He didn't look at me. "Sam," I started, but I didn't know what to say. He picked up his wrench, his movements suddenly jerky and uncertain. He crouched back down and fumbled with the pipe, his earlier competence gone. The silence was deafening now, filled with the echo of what had just happened. After a few minutes of clanking, he stood up abruptly. "It's done," he said, his back still to me. "The new seal should hold. Let me know if it doesn't." He wiped his hands on a rag, his shoulders tight. He packed his tools with frantic, clumsy movements, not looking at me once. My heart was sinking with every tool he put away. This was it. The panic. The regret. I had misread everything. He was tired and vulnerable, and I had taken advantage. He was a nice guy fixing a pipe, and I had turned it into this. He slung his toolbox over his shoulder and walked to the door. He paused with his hand on the knob. I'll see you," he mumbled, and then he was gone. The door clicked shut, and the sound was like a gunshot in the silent apartment. I was left standing in the middle of my kitchen, my lips still tingling, the ghost of his touch on my neck. The pipe was fixed, but everything else was broken. I slid down the cabinets until I was sitting on the floor, right where he had sat, and buried my face in my hands. The cold spot in my chest was back, bigger and icier than ever before. I didn't sleep. I sat on my sofa, wrapped in a blanket, and stared at the perfectly painted, perfectly sealed window. The city lights blurred through the glass as my mind replayed the kiss, his hasty departure, the final, mumbled "see you" every time I closed my eyes. I could feel the rough warmth of his hand, the soft pressure of his lips. And then I would feel the crushing weight of his absence, the finality of the closed door. The morning light, gray and unforgiving, crept into the apartment. I felt hollowed out, exhausted. I had finally allowed a crack of light into my carefully guarded world, only to have it sealed shut more firmly than before. I was a fool. A lonely, hopeful fool. I made a pot of coffee, the movements automatic, and resigned myself to the familiar ache of disappointment. At 8:30, just as I was about to force myself to open my laptop and face the inanity of organic dog food branding, there was a knock on the door. It was a soft, hesitant knock, nothing like Sam's usual firm rap. My heart stopped. It couldn't be. I walked to the door on numb legs, my mind a blank slate of dread and a tiny, treacherous spark of hope. I opened it. It was Sam. He looked as tired as I felt. He hadn't changed from the night before. He was still in his grease-stained shirt and work pants. He was holding 2 paper cups of coffee. He didn't say anything. He just stood there in my doorway, looking at me with those weary, gentle brown eyes. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken apologies and unanswered questions. He started, his voice rough with sleep. "I didn't want you to think," he trailed off, shaking his head as if he couldn't find the right words. He looked down at the coffee cups in his hands. "I'm not good at this, Leo." "At what?" I whispered. "This," he said, gesturing vaguely between us. "Talking." Feelings, he finally met my gaze again, and the raw vulnerability from the night before was back. I freaked out. "I'm sorry. I haven't felt like that in a long time." It threw me. He held out one of the coffee cups to me. An offering. A truce. I took it, my fingers brushing his. This time, he didn't pull away. He let his hand linger for a second, a silent reassurance. "I brought coffee," he said, stating the obvious. A faint, self-deprecating smile touched his lips. "It's all I could think of to do." "Thank you," I said, and my voice was thick with a relief so profound it almost brought me to my knees. I stepped back, holding the door open wider. "Do you want to come in?" He nodded, a look of gratitude washing over his face. He stepped inside, and the apartment, which had felt so empty and cold just moments before, was suddenly full again. He didn't go to the kitchen. He just stood in the small entryway, looking uncertain. "I woke up this morning," he said slowly, looking at the floor, and my first thought was that I had completely ruined everything. He looked up at me. "Did I?" "No," I said, my voice firm, surprising myself. "You didn't." We stood there for a moment longer, sipping our coffees, the silence between us now comfortable, restorative. The tension was gone, replaced by a fragile, tentative understanding. "So," I said, feeling a new boldness. "The phone call you ignored the other day when you were painting." Sam winced. "My sister. She worries. She thinks I work too much, that I'm lonely." He gave a short, humorless laugh. "She's not wrong." And there it was. Another piece of him, offered up. It wasn't a grand confession, just a simple, honest admission that resonated deep within me. He was lonely, too. We were just 2 lonely men, patching holes, looking for something whole. "My landlord thinks I'm an artist," I said, a real smile finally breaking through. He smiled back, a genuine, warm smile that reached his eyes. "My tenant makes good tea." We ended up on the sofa, the one I had spent the night on, torturing myself. We just sat, not touching, but the space between us felt warm and safe. We talked. We really talked. He told me about his father, about the pressure he felt to keep the building running just as his dad would have. I told him about leaving my small hometown, about the feeling of being invisible in a city of millions. It was easy. The words just flowed, filling the quiet apartment. After a while, the conversation lulled. We sat in companionable silence, watching the morning light fill the room. The new paint on the window frame was bright and clean. "I don't know what this is," Sam said quietly, looking at his hands. "Or where it's going." "Me neither," I admitted. My heart was calm, for the first time in a long time. The frantic bird was gone. He turned to me, his expression serious. "But I'd like to find out. If you would." It was a conscious choice, a deliberate step onto uncertain ground. All my fear, my anxiety, my deeply ingrained instinct to retreat into my shell, told me to say no, to protect myself. But looking at his honest, hopeful face, I knew I couldn't. I was tired of being safe and alone. Yeah, I said, my voice clear and steady. I would. He didn't kiss me again. He just reached over and took my hand, lacing his fingers through mine. His hand was big and warm, and it fit perfectly. We sat like that for a long time, hands linked, the empty coffee cups on the table beside us. The sun streamed through the pristine, draft-free window, warming my face. I looked at our joined hands, his scarred and capable, mine pale and smooth. We were a study in contrasts, a mismatched pair. But it felt right. For the first time in years, the cold spot in my chest was gone, replaced by a quiet, steady warmth that had nothing to do with the sunlight. It was the feeling of not being alone. It was the feeling of a broken thing being made whole. It felt like I had come home.